Okay, this is the second project from our media psychology team that we would like to present today. We thought this is a project of ours that might be interesting to the Kai community too, because I'm going to present to you a review of literature from both Kai, communication science, also a lot of other disciplines on this topic of media use disengagement. When do people actually stop their media use? We heard right now in design, we invest a lot in algorithmic curation, personalization of content. Design is supposed to be frictionless. And in today's media environment, content is also permanently available to users, which is a big change from previous analog media forms where people had to watch TV in the evening when a program was on, and today they can access it all the time. So the entertainment environment has changed quite a bit, and we do see that in our empirical data time and time again that people really like this. So they, maybe not on Spotify, with music it's a bit different, but for example on Netflix we see that this curation, frictionless design, so on, is really appreciated by users. They don't want to miss it. They experience it as highly entertaining. At the same time, we also see in our data that people hate that too at the same time. So they report to us that they feel like they have no control over their own media use, and especially that they have a hard time at stopping at the right time. When they are in the process, they don't really feel like they know when to stop. So this is, oops, a bit off. So let's look at this point in time in that media use process. When do users actually decide, okay, now I'm going to stop? We call this media use disengagement, and it describes this situational act of intervening with ongoing media use sessions and deciding, okay, now I want to adapt my behavior and I want to stop that media use activity. There's a lot of different reasons for why I think this is an important thing to study. In media psychology, we have a lot of different models about why and when users select and start a media use activity, how they process content, for example, but there is not really a theoretical approach to how users stop and when they disengage. But also from a more applied perspective, I think we can learn a lot about user experience when we understand why and when people stop using something. And we can also gain insights for interventions for more self-controlled media use, for example. So in the literature, there's not a lot of literature about this, but some people have looked at, okay, what are the reasons for why people stop a media use session? And there are three broad categories. Some are related to the internal environment of the user, so that would be more psychological factors, usually such as emotions and needs. There's the external context, such as location, and then there's external context related to the media, so media cues. And in situation psychology, cues in a situation are defined as this information that is available to someone in the environment and that they can then make sense of to interpret a given situation and what options they have for their own behavior in that situation. In situation psychology and media psychology, there has been some work into organizing those other types of cues. So we have some idea of what external context cues could be like, what internal cues could look like, for example, psychological states related to emotions, to needs, goals, mental resources like attention, all that kind of stuff. People have worked on that. But for media cues, it's a bit of a mess. We don't really know what has been studied, how we can systematize that. So with our review, we wanted to dive a bit deeper into that and follow three goals. The first is to see, okay, who studied this topic with regards to what media and so on, get a bit of a structural overview. Then also organize the media cues that have been studied by levels of analysis and evaluate some of the relevance of these cues. So do we now know what predicts disengagement or not? We did a systematic literature review in two databases. So we found around 3,500 articles in ACM Digital Library and Communication Abstracts database related to disengagement from media. We looked across all different types of media applications, so digital media, analog media, all different kinds. And we had three coders apply a code book and then select relevant studies. So in our final sample, we have 27 studies that studied media cues for disengagement, and they identified 90 media cues in those studies. Here are some of the more structural overview results. So we see that so far, it's not a lot of research on this topic yet, and it's studied most in the US and Germany. Only non-Western country is China, but mainly Western countries. Computer science is like the front runner discipline that looks into this so far, but also information science, communication sciences, economics, a lot of different disciplines involved. Interestingly, in 20% of all studies, some industry partners involved, mostly applies to computer science. And what we also see, there's a really big diversity of methodological approaches. So there's a lot of more exploratory research designs like mixed methods, ethnographies, for example, and less confirmatory research designs like experiments or survey designs. In our sample, most of those studies looked at online news search or information search, but also some gaming research on disengagement. And in total, we saw 11 different media types, but things like smartphone use or messenger use was less represented in the data. So the next step was to make sense of all those 90 media cues and to systematize them a bit more. So as you can imagine, sometimes studies, they look at the same things, right? So when we condense that down, we see 43 unique media cues across all those studies. Most of them are idiosyncratic, so they're just studied in one study and they only apply to one level of analysis. For those levels of analysis, we used a taxonomy from computer-mediated communication that tries to systematize how we can look at media use. So we have a device level, then nested in that is application, feature, interaction, and message. And in this picture, we see that the media cues that are studied are not proportionately distributed across those levels. I brought some examples. So first one is the feature level, was second most prominent level to be studied. This could be things like on social media, for example, that if you separate a feed into multiple pages, called pagination sometimes, that is a predictor of disengagement. Or people looked at explicit features to save gaming progress, for example. With this level of analysis, it was interesting to see that this was only studied for digital media, even though technically it could also be studied for all other types of media. The interaction level, on the other hand, also interesting, only studied in the gaming context, even though for other interactive media like social media, this could also be really interesting. Here, some example of media cues are disagreements with other players, harassment, skill mismatch in games, for example. And then the most prominent level for media cues was the message level. So cues that relate to content, for example, such as negative content valence, information redundancy, or closure cues, like when somebody finishes a gaming level, for example, this is a cue that prompts them to stop their media exposure. When we take all that together and look at, okay, what do those studies tell us? We see that for 48% of cues, we have positive results that show us when this cue is present, it makes the disengagement from that media use activity more likely. But there's also some issues here in the literature. In 29% of all studies, it was, or for all 29% of all cues, it was not recognizable from the study what the effect on disengagement is. So this is, for example, when a demo is designed or intervention is designed that combines multiple media cues. Those are not separated in the analysis. So we cannot make a really concrete answer to, was this feature, was this cue relevant, yes or no, because it's all mixed up, or because the behavior that was then observed is a mixture of different stuff. So if you look at behaviors such as ad avoidance, which has been done in the past, one item of that is, do people disengage earlier, yes or no? Another item is if they want to permanently discontinue using that medium altogether. Those are different behaviors, but they were all combined into one variable. outcome variable, and then we don't really know what that influence on disengagement was. And then in 19% of cues, it wasn't even specified in the study. It wasn't even explicitly said what the effect on disengagement was. So again, for example, if an intervention, a demo is designed, it wasn't then really evaluated. Did it actually make a change in people's behavior, yes or no? So if we combine all that in 58% of cues, we cannot really even say how it affects disengagement yet. So the literature is a bit all over the place. If we take that together, we currently have a field that's really eclectic, so a lot of different cues that are studied, broad concepts like ad avoidance, for example, that could be more specific to certain behaviors. The term disengagement is my choice, and I've seen that it's also used a lot in gaming studies, but there's also a lot of other terms that kind of float around the field, stopping behavior, logging off. There's not really an established concept yet. Our review itself also has some limitations, of course, that also flow from those previous ones. So because the terminology is still inconsistent, we try to have a really big search string for our literature search, but we definitely have missed a lot of important work. For example, because some studies don't even say that they study disengagement. When you look into the data, it's in there, but it's not really caught by a systematic literature review approach. We also decided for not including engagement studies because this blows up the literature base and makes a systematic review unfeasible. But obviously, sometimes people study disengagement under the label of we're doing an engagement study. So again, might have missed some stuff here. What are the implications that we can draw from this review? So first thing is, how should theory approach media use disengagement? The first thing is clearly define the concept and clearly define what situational cues are relevant. Look more at how people use those cues to then come to a behavioral adaptation. So we call this appraisal process. How do people make sense of those cues? And then try to make sure that a potential disengagement model is applicable across different media use types, because ending a media use session is kind of universal across media. I'm working on that theory part. For empirical research, it's interesting that in related behaviors like permanent discontinuance of use of certain applications, there are other cues that are already studied that could be translated to disengagement too, but that needs to be tested. The different media use types should be more systematically compared, and that field could make use of even more in situ methods. So stuff as Felix presented, for example, we're focusing on that in our lab. For example, to combine track data with those intensive longitudinal surveys. So you can just ask people, you can track when they stop using Netflix, for example, and then trigger a survey right in that situation and ask them questions about it. So you have more situational data. And then design implications are really preliminary because I showed you the literature is still a bit messy. But it seems that those implications really depend on what type of media use we're talking about, how goal-directed it is, and what the user motivations are. If I would have to make recommendations, I would say for entertainment media, like gaming, for example, it seems that the goal of the user is not to disengage super early, right? They want to enjoy their media use, but when they decide it's the time, design should assist them and make it as easy as possible for them to disengage and to not like hide a lockout button somewhere, but to make it easy for them. For more goal-directed media use, like information search, disengagement is actually something really good because it can signal that people have found the information, have completed that task, and can finish that activity. So here, disengagement should be something that is really pursued by design early in the process. Overall, it's really important to mitigate friction because things like technical issues are never appreciated by the user, right? Yeah, so to sum it up, I would say that fostering positive agentic experiences of disengagement are really important to a user experience design, because also doing some work on that, we see that when people are frustrated with this process and feel like it's not made easy for them, this can accumulate into more frustration when they decide, okay, I'm not gonna use that medium again anymore. We see that those intentions for digital disconnection, using phones less, using digital media less, is increasing in populations. So if we can make sure to improve user experience in the process, I think we can also mitigate some of those trends. So thanks for your attention.
So I'm a bit interested on the part of separating between positive or virtuous disengagement and negative disengagement. As you mentioned, like when you're searching for information on news, you might stop when you find something. But I will add, you might also stop when you get frustrated about finding nothing. Is there, are you also working on a way to identify when it is positive and when it is negative? Or is the literature discussing this part more, especially with specific media in mind? Because it also, on the same note of positive disengagement, maybe it is positive for the general ecosystem and not only for the user at the same time. For example, when I'm engaging with social media and it's an endless scroll, there is no paginations or there is no feature that will stop me, but that's not necessarily good because, you know, time is wasted and people get addicted. So how do you see the literature approaching this type of differentiation between disengagement?
Very good question, thank you. So there is not a lot of work to my knowledge on that so far. There are Kai people in Karlsruhe in Germany around Dmitry Alexandrovsky, who did some of that research when it comes to gaming. And in Mainz at our university, people have worked on that with regards to social media and found that most situations are relatively positive, so people don't have big issues with disengaging, and then it's interesting to look at what media cues make it that pleasurable and easy for people. And only, I think, in around 8% of all sessions, it's like it's a frustrating experience to the user. And then I think it's really interesting to also look at that interaction between how is the medium designed, and then also what norms do people perceive, or what standards do they have for themselves about what's a good use of time, what's time wasted, and so on, because that also influences that. So while this review only focused on the media design, on media cues, we would always argue for also including those internal cues and those appraisal processes. How do people then perceive the design, and like how do those interact, like psychology and design?
People who provide this, the industries who provide these services, if they have an interest to not encourage you to disengage. So therefore, that's why you don't see these interfaces to be so effective.
Yeah. Yes, engagement has been like the biggest goal, right, in design so far, but also in that literature, I would say more the Kai literature is ahead in the game compared to other disciplines of also taking that next step and reflecting like, okay, is that actually, should that be our design goal? Is that ethical? When do we have to assist the user? So the gaming research is mostly qualitative, and there you really see that gamers appreciate when they decide that they want to stop, that this is made easy for them. So that is something that influences user satisfaction. So it should definitely be a design goal too.
No, but I'm wondering if it's not a design issue, but a business issue.
Of course, yeah. The businesses are usually interested in like keeping users engaged, right? But it's kind of like this stuff. So I'm also working a lot on digital disconnection, and we see that the more societies get digitalized, the more they want to get rid of it. So they need a pause, they want to reflect on that. And those practices do increase, especially in Scandinavia. You can see that people disengage a lot. They put away their phone, they sign off certain social media platforms. And I think those two behaviors are connected, that if people feel like, okay, my media use is not in my own control, like in that very situation, that also fosters them to be like, okay, I want to get rid of that in the long term. So actually the platforms should be interested in making that easy for the user because it has downstream effects.
more thinking. That we have an issue as society with the definition of a term medium, because medium in the old days was something much more clearly defined, and now we use it for all sorts of activities, platforms, devices, and applications that they are, for me, it's not easy to put them all under, because you use social media, gaming as a medium, platforms, entertainment media, etc., all under the same research agenda. And that might be one of the reasons why there is a difficulty I see in your research to try to get broad results from this. So we may need to be very careful of how you define it, perhaps make it more specific. To give you an example, social media is an ongoing activity which is threading our life. We can do it while our attentional resources are on all sorts of other things, while when I sit down and watch a film on Netflix, is a different attentional resource I put there. Therefore, the context of the way I interact and the disengagement issue you study has different characteristics.
Yeah, really good point. So at this point, there's not enough research to really compare the different media. So in this first step, we said, okay, let's put it all in there and see for what media do we even have data and so on. So yeah, I think it's really important to do more research in different types of media uses and then see, can we even compare them? Because I would still argue that for every type of media use, there's a time where people put up, they take a device, they use the medium and then they put it down, and that's a universal thing for all media. So the level of analysis is the individual session here, and I think you can compare it, but it's also a bit of an open question. So yeah, needs to be done more.